Study smart, not hard. This is something we've all probably heard at some point, but what does studying smart actually look like? Hey friends, welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Hassan. I'm a third year medical student at UCL. In this video, we'll be exploring my 3-step process to learning and understanding anything. There's 3 steps that I take when approaching a new topic. The first step is I scope the subject. Next, I try to understand it. And finally, I always end with memorizing the topic. I guess a lot of people's main focus is the memorization part, so they might skip out the scoping and the understanding. But in my opinion, these two are the most important of the 3, as it leads to much easier memorization and it could stay in your long-term memory for a lot longer. Especially in medical school, where you have so much information that you need to learn and it can almost feel really overwhelming. So you just resort to straight memorization of as much of the content as you can. But ultimately, when you need the information a few years down the line, or you need the information in a few months, it won't be there for you to retrieve it. So on to scoping the subject. So by scoping the subject, I mean find all the information that you need for every lecture and for every topic within that subject and gather it all into one place. I usually use Notion for this, and the way I set it out is my year is split into 6 modules, so I'll write the 6 modules down, and then I'll have a table for each module, and within the table I'll insert every single topic within that module. So this leads me to have all the information that I need in a nice, easy to read single page. And on top of this, I also include any exam dates or any coursework dates that I have, so everything's just all in one place. So if I ever need to reference anything, I know where to find the information. The benefit of doing this, aside from having all the information there so easily accessible, is it makes studying a lot more approachable. When I inevitably fall a few weeks behind, it can feel really overwhelming and it can feel really difficult to sort of get back on track, because it sort of feels like I'm looking up a mountain and there's so much content for me to cover. But by having scoped the subject beforehand and I know everything that I need to know, I can still continue to make progress even whilst being a couple of weeks behind, and I can still feel happy in the progress that I'm making. So there's 2 scenarios after you've scoped the subject. Either you're studying it for the very first time, or you're revising the subject. If you're revising something that you've already done before, then I'd recommend picking the topic that would lose you the most marks in the exam and focusing entirely on that for the day. And then repeat this process every single day, and it allows you to improve on your most struggled topic and on the topic that you lose the most marks on, therefore giving you the highest yield when it comes to the exam. When I'm studying the content for the first time, I usually look at if I have any pressing deadlines. If I do, then I'll look at the module at the topic, and if I'm not entirely confident on it, that's usually my focus for the next few days until I become confident on it. And it's just, I sort of work like that. Onto the understanding portion. For this, I usually watch lectures at the highest possible speed I can, as long as I can still retain and understand the information being given by the lecturer. So last year during medicine, I could watch lectures on 2 times speed, because the concepts weren't that difficult to understand. But this year with machine learning, I'm usually watching the lectures probably 1.2, 1.3 speed, because it's a lot more complicated. The concepts are much more difficult to sort of understand. But whilst watching the lecture, I usually have a Notion page open to the side where I can write down notes for that particular topic. So if I'm learning about linear regression, I'll have a notes page where I'll write down questions as I'm learning it from the lecture, to then test myself at the end of the lecture. This helps me really realize whether I understood the lecture or not, and it also helps with the memorization portion of it all. Another technique that I have is, last year when I was studying medicine, I used notes from the year above and I just annotated them as I was going through the lecture, and this way it meant that I didn't have to make my own notes. I could sort of use somebody else's notes. And because the students at UCL are really nice and really amazing, there's notes from the year above of an entire Anki deck made by this person called James Kai, absolute legend. I have no idea who he is, but his resources helped me get through the first 2 years of med school. I would annotate notes and I would understand the lecture as I'm watching it, but this understanding wouldn't last for long unless I committed it to memory, and that's where my Anki would come in. It was easy to uncover like one lecture at a time because of the way he tagged the whole deck. So I could watch a lecture, uncover it in the deck, and then just solely focus on that lecture and learn it to the best ability that I can. On that note, the final step of this 3-step process of scoping the subject, understanding the subject, is memorizing the subject. I sort of touched on this with Anki, but with memorizing, I usually leverage active recall and spaced repetition as much as I can. If you're not familiar with these concepts, Ali Abdal has an amazing video covering both of these, so I'll link them in the description below. But a brief overview is active recall is where instead of passively reading the notes or passively reading stuff that you've highlighted, you're actively making your brain work to retrieve the knowledge. So this might be answering questions, for example. You might ask, what is a nucleus? And you have to actively retrieve the information that comes to your head. What is a nucleus? So by answering these questions or by retrieving this knowledge in an active process, it leads to a much higher retention because your brain has to work harder for it. And with the higher retention comes a higher retention time as well. So you learn the information for much longer periods of time. This links into why I write questions and I try to recall the information rather than just passively read through the lecture slides again, or any notes that I make, but I usually don't make any notes anymore these days. So onto spaced repetition. This is where you interrupt the forgetting curve at different intervals. So for example, you might learn a certain topic today, go over it again tomorrow, and then maybe go over it again in 1 week, then 1 month, and each time you'd go over it at a greater interval, because this helps commit it to memory, and every time you go over it, you learn that topic for a little bit longer. So they say you should incorporate the two, active recall and spaced repetition, into your studying so as to maximize your studying effort, and then this way you can study for much fewer hours and free up a lot of time to do other things. With all that being said, Anki is the gold standard for both active recall and spaced repetition, as the algorithm incorporates both of them already. So there's very little configuration that you need to do afterwards, and you can sort of just set it up, make your deck and go ahead with it. Another benefit is if you go to a university where the students are super nice and may share resources, then you could get Anki decks from the year above and sort of download them straight into Anki and use them. I'd probably use these with a little bit of caution because the way they studied might be a little bit different to the way you study, and they might inherently remember certain facts more than others, and they wouldn't have included them in the Anki deck. So I just cross-reference the information in the Anki deck with the information that you need to know, just to make sure everything's there. So you get a comprehensive view of your curriculum. Or you can even make your own cards for each topic and each lecture, and this in itself will help you understand and memorize the content even more. If you enjoyed this video, smash the like button and check out any of my other videos. I'll have them linked on screen, and hopefully see you guys in the next one.